What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Off the Bench. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson. Pat, we finally have some football actually in the rearview mirror. Did you check out the Hall of Fame game?
I did not watch a second. I looked at the
didn't
box score.
Miss anything?
I looked at the box score and recall none of it.
Yeah,
so there was nothing about it stood out to me in any way, except I heard Kellen Mond was really fucking bad. That was the sense I got just from scanning Twitter the day after.
I was going to say, Kellen Mond, the memes I saw, you know the NBA memes where it's like, get ready to learn Chinese, buddy? It was like, it was that, but it was get ready to learn Canadian, buddy, which is even funnier because that's not a language. All you have to do is incorporate A and hoser into your dialogue. But yeah, the CFL, AAF, or fan-controlled football, whatever leagues are still out there, they're probably scouting pretty hard for Kellen Mond. I think the XFL might be too good for Kellen Mond, to be honest with you. But yeah, my takeaways from that game were as follows. We're not going to spend too much time on this because it doesn't fucking matter. But Zach Wilson still sucks. Will McDonald looked pretty good, first rounder. I was kind of surprised. It was like jarring to see names, and I was like, oh wait, that guy's actually relevant. Like he's going to be a thing eventually. Because my brain was like, this is going to be strictly players who suck and don't matter. Zach Wilson's still bad. Tim Boyle, UConn great, got a ton of run. Guys, I want you to know this. Tim Boyle, and this is a bit of a rant, I don't know how he got to the NFL. Because if you look up Tim Boyle's stats, the first thing you'll see is his first year at UConn, he threw 0 touchdowns and 8 interceptions in however many games he played. His next year wasn't any better. He ended up transferring to, I think,
Western Kentucky. Or was it? No, it might have been Eastern.
One of the directional Kentuckys. And he wasn't very good there either. So I don't know how this man got to the NFL,
which is
but
FCS
it's jarring
too.
Every time I see him.
Because like Western Kentucky would at least be like Conference USA, FBS, like reasonable, but Eastern Kentucky, that's FCS. He went to Xavier, didn't he? I think he went
so.
to Xavier.
So this dude's been in the NFL as a backup for like 4 or 5 years now, and I'm just like, how did you even get to this? How did you get scouted enough to become a backup? It's all very confusing. The good part of the Hall of Fame game was Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who I did shout out on the pod. I was like, this is the one guy I'm kind of excited to see. Honestly, shattered all expectations. I mean, I was excited to see him just because I know he's a good athlete and he flashed at UCLA, but that dude, I mean, damn, like he was toying with guys at the line, like trying to, his scrambles were just the fakes. They were very, very entertaining. He looked like he had great control when he was out there. And granted, he's against, second and third string guys, but still very, very impressive guy. And again, not to overreact to the Hall of Fame game, but it looked like a guy who probably should be the primary backup to Deshaun. I mean, who's he competing with? It's Josh Dobbs, who's basically lower upside DTR. And I know you're not necessarily looking for upside at your second string quarterback, but Josh Dobbs isn't really a reliable hold it down guy himself. We saw what he did with the Titans last year, and it was nothing inspiring. So DTR could be a name that is, piddling around the Browns depth chart here sooner than later, but very, very impressed by what I saw from him.
At least I will say this isn't as bad as last year's Hall of Fame game when people were ready to declare Zamir White king of the universe.
Man. Yeah, that was the narratives around last year's Hall of Fame game were definitely worse because there was people had concerns going in already about Josh Jacobs and how Josh McDaniels was going to use him. So then we got some good old confirmation bias when Zamir White got all the work and looked decent. And then Zamir White was a big old nothing burger all year.
The fact that Jacobs was playing in the Hall of Fame game to begin with.
Yes, that's what it was. That's right.
It was a huge red flag, and I bought it. And then the dude is RB1 in non-PPR scoring. It's just like
I forgot that was what the concern was. After that,
I don't think I will ever take anything. Like the way it is with preseason is mostly just like guys trying to make the roster and just trying to get the guys warmed up a little bit. Like, I mean, there's little implications, but like if you're looking for major implications on fantasy in the preseason, you're probably not going to find any. You might find a guy like, hey, I can draft this guy in the 15th round and maybe he'll be good. But like if you're talking, the true bread and butter players, you're not going to find much here in the next 3 weeks.
No, the only actionable things you can really take from the preseason are maybe identifying who primary backups are going to be, who the first guy is out there after the starter comes out, and also identifying who starters are going to be, or at least guys who are going to play a large percentage of snaps. I mean, probably maybe not so much the first preseason game, but the second and third, we'll see the guys that are playing multiple drives, and that'll be notable. Like for the Chiefs, I mean, granted, they could just bench everybody, but like we've been talking about Sky Moore, and we'll actually talk about him a little bit later. Like, is he playing, strictly with the Mahomes-led offense, and then he's coming off when the second stringers come in? That's a good sign if you're a Sky Moore guy, and that's a good sign for any receiver that you're in on where their workload is a sort of a question at this point, where you're not 100% sure. So just. You can kind of take some depth chart conclusions away based on where guys are playing, how much they're playing, and who they're playing with. But other than that, like, don't take too much. Don't look at the box scores and expect to take anything away from that, because that's how you fall into the trap of a guy like Marquez Callaway, who I loved 2 years ago.
Oh,
He just kept scoring touchdowns in the preseason. I was like, he looks good, and he
Lester
did
Jean.
for the preseason. Lester Jean, the boy. But Pat, let's get into some news here, and I've implemented some sound effects here to kick off some segments. I'm going to slowly start implementing these more and more, but as we get into our news.
Button?
Not yet. You can add a boing button if
Boing,
you want.
yeah.
But as we get into the news...
Good evening. I'm Ron Burgundy, and this is what's happening in your world tonight.
Oh, I like that.
Short and sweet. Nice and simple. Ron Burgundy introducing our news section. But, Pat, the biggest news happened a few days ago. Alvin Kamara's suspension is official. He will be out 3 games. Roughly what we expected. We expected between 2 to 4. We got exactly the number in between at 3 games. And to follow that up, Kareem Hunt is expected to sign with the Saints. I don't believe it's official yet, but it is expected after he worked out with them yesterday. So we've got 2 of our questions answered from last week. How much is Alvin Kamara going to be suspended? And where the fuck is Kareem Hunt? I found him. He's in New Orleans. So, Pat, how are you looking at this backfield now? I mean, it was already muddy before. I think we kind of viewed Kamara as, sort of a value based on how late he was going. But is this a total stay away backfield for you? Because I think it is for me. I don't like it.
Yes and no, in the sense where I'm not really picking any of these guys to be reliable players on my team. But I think Kamara's stock goes up a good amount after this, because, a lot of the news I read, people were kind of bracing for like 6 or more, which was bizarre because I didn't think it was going to be nearly that much. But the fact that he's only going to be out 3 weeks, and honestly, I think getting Kareem Hunt helps him a little bit, because it doesn't really allow Kendre Miller to, truly prosper in those 3 games. I think getting Kareem Hunt is more of an indication of that, like, hey, they may not be ready to hand Kendre Miller that kind of change of pace back with, because you know what Jamal Williams you're going to get from Jamal Williams. So if that's still a really muddy running back room when Kamara gets back, I think that's even more of a point that he's still going to be the guy. And we talked about his decline last year, but not like fall off a cliff decline, but there were still signs that he could be a productive running back. And where he's going, I should probably have his ADP up. That's awesome on my part. Let's see where our boy is.
This is on our research team that we don't have for not getting these statistics. Ready and waiting
so he is RB. He's RB 28, going at pick 88. So what? That's round 8.
Yeah, 8. I mean 8 in. Yeah, I think in 12 teams.
I think that's great. Even without the 3 games, I think that's strong value there, because obviously he's not a guy that's going to be in your starting lineup, but that's a guy with crazy upside that you're getting, outside of the starting realm. As for the other 3. Not interested. If I had to pick one of them, it would be Jamal Williams just for the touchdown upside. But, like, it's fun. I saw a really good tweet that was like, we didn't trust Kareem Hunt to start last year. Why should we trust him this year? And he makes a good point, and one of the comments was like, oh, but he was good, ... 6 years ago? So it's like, I feel like,
Kansas City
honestly,
days.
I feel like lumping him in with, like, Dalvin and Zeke, who were better more recently, might have been, might not have been the right way to go. I saw another tweet where it was like, I think Kareem Hunt is more of a Kenyon Drake signing than a Dalvin Cook signing.
Oh, not the Kenyon Drake comp,
but just from the perspective where he may not have a massive impact, and obviously we'll see what the number is on the deal. If it's not a big deal, snip, snip, snip. You never even know if he'll even make the team at this point. But for Kamara, I think it goes up. For the other 3, I'm just out. And like I did a dynasty startup draft over the weekend, and I did take Kendre Miller late. And but I think he's the one that really takes the hit from this. But it's a gross room, but I still think Kamara has a chance to be really solid, especially round 8. Like that's great value, I think.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at rookie running backs like Kendre Miller, I think the Kareem Hunt signing is just a sign that Kendre is going to fall in line with a lot of rookie running backs where they're just not going to do much their rookie year. The Saints probably, evaluated him over the first few weeks of training camp, and they didn't see enough to make them comfortable to go into the season with just him and Jamal Williams and whoever else may be behind them, Taysom Hill too, whatever, as their, backfield to hold it down while Kamara's out. You make a good point about Kamara's ADP. I think 8th round. Look, you and I know this as well. In a 12-teamer, once you start trying to fill your bench spots, it's like the first guy you draft to your bench could be a guy that you drop after week 1. Like, that's not without.
No, that's not out of the realm of possibility at all.
That kind of thing happens all the time. You are progressively just scratching off different lottery tickets as you go down, filling out your bench, and they're all, the probabilities continue to go down. But even the first guy, the probability is maybe 60-40. A guy like Kamara is at least going to have, obviously a partial role after all he's done in New Orleans. The Hunt thing, I do wonder, you mentioned if they could cut him before the season, even though they're bringing him on right now. I wonder if they would cut him after Kamara comes back. But then at the same time, I wonder if Kareem would sign with them to begin with if he knew that was their plan. Like, I'm sure that's something that he and his agents will talk about with the Saints. Like, okay, you're signing me in the immediate aftermath of Alvin Kamara getting suspended. What does this look like when Alvin Kamara comes back? Do I have a role? Are you getting rid of me? What is happening?
But like you said, we talked about it last week. Where the hell has Kareem Hunt been? Like, there seems to have been really no interest.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's indicative of the fact that Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook are much more desirable players at this point in their career. And so I just don't know if he's necessarily that big of a threat. Maybe they wouldn't cut him, but maybe Hunt just didn't have much of a choice. Maybe he'll go out there and impress 3 weeks and Kamara comes back and they won't want to cut him.
Yeah, I mean, the lack of visits definitely does maybe indicates something, right? That there just wasn't a lot of interest on it. We were wondering if maybe he was just being picky, but in my opinion, like, you still visit with teams, even if you're going to be picky. Like, you still want to get a feel for. I doubt he was turning down visits. So, look, he comes to the Saints immediately after Kamara's gone. I imagine he gets extremely minimal touches when Kamara comes back. And if you can get Kamara at a price where you are throwing him into your flex, even if he has lost a step, I do see some value there. I think overall this backfield is tough to evaluate just because of the presence of Jamal Williams and Taysom Hill's propensity to line up in the backfield at times. But one thing we will talk about a little later, Pat, is strength of schedule for some of these teams. The Saints have an absolute cakewalk for almost the whole season. So,
you look at their division they play in. You've got 6 games against Carolina, Atlanta, and Tampa, who at the very least are going to go anywhere from terrible to okay. So that alone.
And those are teams that, may have semi-formidable defenses. The Falcons obviously bringing in a lot of guys, but it's still not defenses that are really striking fear into your hearts. But even the non-divisional games, like they're playing versus Tennessee to start the season, not a bad defense, but not one that you're, terrified of. And just to look at some of these non-divisional games, they play the Bears, they play the Vikings, they play the Lions. Like, they're playing the entire NFC North. It's like these matchups don't scare you. There's going to be probably a good amount of scoring opportunities for the Saints. And, the more I looked at this, I was like, man, I've tried to make my divisional predictions. Who's going to win each division? Like, I'm probably picking the Saints now. Like,
we're going to have to do that, aren't we? Probably before the season.
We'll probably do that as we get a little closer.
Yeah.
Official division predictions, award predictions. We can do all that fun stuff. But that's where we're at. Alvin Kamara suspended 3 games, probably a value if his ADP sticks in the 8th round, and I can't imagine his value is going to rise because why would it? I mean, this
maybe
was
not
around
much,
the
like maybe a round, I would say, but still, you're still in that range where he's not on your starting lineup.
Yeah, I guess even though like there is an official suspension now and it's more or less in line with what we expected, I personally shy away from drafting guys in mocks until I have some sort of certainty on their situation, even if that certainty is it's a negative. I mean, we don't want him to be suspended if we're going to draft him in fantasy, but I now know what I'm dealing with, so I may be more likely to pick him. Pat, the other piece of running back news here, Zach Charbonnet is back. Kenneth Walker's not. So we talked about some of the uncertainty around this backfield and both these guys going down with injuries in the very early portion of camp. Zach Charbonnet, it sounded sort of bleak. Pete Carroll said he was out indefinitely, and I will say this. I listened to the Fantasy Footballers podcast and their take on this situation. They were like, Pete Carroll's being really liberal with his use of the word indefinite because he wasn't wrong. He indefinite can mean anything. A guy can leave a game for a snap, and you could say, oh, he's out indefinitely, and then he can come back the following snap. You didn't lie. You didn't know how long he was going to be out. But Zach Charbonnet back pretty quickly here, participating in camp. We'll see if he gets preseason run. I'd be very interested to watch him get, a pretty large portion of carries in their first preseason game, assuming Walker is out. But Pat, my concern last week was, Zach Charbonnet as a rookie missing these reps. These can be valuable reps, even though as a running back they translate to the NFL quicker than other positions. It's still valuable. You still need to get up to speed. That's no longer a concern, so that's good. Kenneth Walker, still don't think it's anything to be overly scared of. I mean, there's been virtually no update on it. Still got
time too, yeah.
Still got time. Hasn't been back at practice. One thing I'll say is from doing mock drafts over the past week or so and watching ADPs, or at least on ESPN, where it's just my preferred mock drafting spot, mostly because that's where we play our main fantasy league, Pat. Zach Charbonnet's ADP and rank has plummeted, and I am very interested to see if it bounces back now that he's back at practice. But Pat, I just did a mock draft. He was 212th overall. This was a guy that peaked, I want to say, in like the 110s, 120s.
He's like in underdog, at least. He's like on the fringe of being in the dead zone. I understand best ball's a different game, but that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy low.
I think it's because ESPN's mocks and ranks are very reactive to what people have done over the past, let's say, week. Let me look at the 2023 Fantasy Pros rankings. I want to see where Charbonnet is, because these are, maybe a little more redraft focused. So he's RB 40 on Fantasy Pros. Let me see where he is overall, because I'm assuming it's not, 230. Yeah, he's 107. So, look, if you guys are drafting anytime soon, be it on ESPN or otherwise, anywhere that has reflected this sort of drastic change, draft Zach Charbonnet. We've talked a million times about him and Walker being potentially in a close to a 50-50 split at some point. Similar draft capital spent on both guys. There's a world where these guys have very similar workloads on a team that loves to run the ball, and you are getting Charbonnet at his ESPN ADP, 8 rounds later than Kenneth Walker, but at least, 3, 4, 5 rounds later. So it's a worthy investment now that we know he's not seriously hurt now he's back in practice.
Yeah, it's hard to know. We won't really know until we get more clarity on Walker. As the weeks go by, if he's not back, they're going to have to say something like, oh, yeah, he's going to miss the start of the year. Then, okay, Charbonnet, and then Charbonnet's going to go through the fucking roof.
Yeah.
And speaking of ESPN, I just saw a tweet here from ESPN PR. ESPN has entered an agreement with Penn Entertainment to launch ESPN Bet, a branded sports book in the U.S. ESPN Bet will be available to fans of all. An ESPN sports book.
Wow. Very interesting.
That's wild.
Okay, well, we're not sponsored by them yet. We'd like to be.
Do I think I think I legally have to abandon DraftKings and FanDuel now? Like, am I going to be allowed to not use that, or?
Well, ESPN was a major partner of DraftKings as of recently, I thought. So, are they not doing that anymore? I have no idea how that's going to shake out. We'll see. But yeah, very, very interesting news. Pat, a lot more running back drama here going on, and we've kind of got the same names that we've had over the past few weeks, but there have been some developments. A development that I feel like, look, all this talk of Jonathan Taylor has dominated the news cycles over the first few weeks of camp. This one, though, I felt like that this update went under the radar when it shouldn't have. So Jonathan Taylor, not at practice today. Shane Steichen said he's rehabbing his ankle. What? So the ankle thing, if you'll recall, he missed a good chunk of last season with an ankle injury, ended up getting cleanup surgery shortly after the season. That cleanup surgery, as Nate Atkins of the Indianapolis Star will report, carries a 2 to 4 week recovery timeline. His teammate E.J. Speed, linebacker on the Colts, underwent a similar procedure, and he's been participating since minicamp. So, Pat, what this seems like to me is that, there's weird stuff going on with Jonathan Taylor still, which we knew, and that the Colts are just keeping him away from the team, and they're kind of just hoping people see ankle and they just accept it because that's what his injury was last year, without digging into the context that this should not be bothering him anymore. Unless he had a setback, there should not be more ankle rehab at this point of camp and the preseason after the months he's had since an extremely minor surgery. Like, I don't know what's going on here. I think, look, we're not going to find out probably unless somebody tells us what's going on, but this situation was already weird, concerning for Jonathan Taylor's, potential fantasy value and his actual season outlook. And it's only gotten worse now because this doesn't make any sense. I would have been more accepting of it if they said he was still missing time with the back injury. I don't know if they backed off of that because of Taylor publicly saying his back didn't hurt. And so they were like, well, we can't say this now, but maybe they came to an agreement with him, like, hey, we're going to pass it off as an ankle while we sort some things out behind the scenes. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but you can't just say his ankle hurts again without a reason why.
Or you could look at it from the perspective that Taylor said hey, my ankle kind of hurts. I'm not practicing. I forgot where I heard. What podcast I said, but this was a BDG the other day I was listening to where they said do we think running backs are kind of going to start saying oh, my ankle hurts a little bit, and they might have played through it in years past, but now they're not gonna.
Right.
Could we see that again? I'd still like to think no, but maybe.
Yeah. And I will say this is a situation that obviously will be the most closely monitored running back situation, or at least tied for the most closely monitored with Josh Jacobs as we approach, more draft weekends. But I mean, that's really fucking me up, Pat. I've said it before. I'll say it a million times. Jonathan Taylor getting kind of bopped out of the top few running backs here has screwed up my strategy for our non-PPR leagues, because now I've had to settle in on potentially taking Tony Pollard at number 7 overall. For those of you unaware, and Pat, this is another pet peeve I have. If you look at rankings out there for non-PPR leagues, and I know I'm speaking into the void here probably because nobody else fucking plays these leagues anymore. The rankings out there for non-PPR leagues still have a ton of pass catchers near the top, but when you sort by points scored last year and fantasy points per game in non-PPR leagues, it's overwhelmingly running backs. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like these rankers are being lazy and they don't want to change it much from PPR, and they're just neglecting the non-PPR leagues. But I went in there, and this is part of how I settled on Pollard, because I was like, man, can I really take him? It's going to be his first year as a workhorse, quote unquote, back. Maybe Deuce Vaughn changes that. And then I look, and Tony Pollard was 6th in fantasy points per game in non-PPR leagues, behind 5 other running backs, by the way. It's all running backs in non-PPR. So that's just my little aside on non-PPR rankings and how I think they're kind of lazy. They're just copy and pasting and shifting some things. Or they're like, okay, we'll move Chubb up a little bit because he doesn't catch a lot of passes. Other than that, we're not really doing much. But yeah, that's my little rant there. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor though has thrown a big wrench into things. I'll be very curious to see where his draft position ends up being. What is it? 3 weeks from now, 3.5 weeks from now, something like that.
Crazy.
Could be anywhere from first round to third round to undrafted if he is out for I don't know what's going to happen with Taylor, but biggest name with a lot of question marks.
It's definitely not a good situation. Is what you can certainly say
all around for sure. Another situation that's not the best, Josh Jacobs. So there hasn't been so much an update on this situation as there has been speculation, and I want to take this with a grain of salt because it came from Pro Football Talk, and I don't think it's necessarily anything but speculation that the franchise tag could be rescinded. It's just one of the options on the table, I guess, for Josh Jacobs. And if the tag was rescinded, PFT reports that the Chiefs and Broncos would be interested in Jacobs as a free agent. Now, this is looking pretty far ahead, and it sounds so not plausible because it's 2 division rivals, and it's like, why would the Raiders rescind a franchise tag knowing that these 2 teams are the most interested? Is this a leverage play by somebody? It's a very weird situation. I just want to offer this perspective as I see Pat disagrees with the first part of what I put in our little show sheet. So I said, it sounds ridiculous, but would the Raiders really care that much if a division rival took Josh Jacobs? Because they're not competing this year.
Whoa.
This is where Pat noted whoa, in all bold. They're not competing this year, and knowing how short running back shelf lives are, they might not really care that much. They're not valuing the running back, and they may say, hey, division rival, go ahead and take this guy who we don't believe is going to be relevant for more than 2 more years anyway. It would also be a very Raiders outcome for Jacobs, for this all to play out, him end up as a Chief or a Bronco, and then just be disgusting for the next 5 years and terrorize the Raiders twice a year. But just an interesting, I guess, hypothetical to put out there that PFT kind of put out there. There's nothing concrete new on Josh Jacobs. We're just kind of still sitting here waiting, seeing if he shows up to camp and what he decides to do.
Yeah, I will say the lack of talk about the situation. We're seeing pretty consistent updates on Jonathan Taylor. And there were very consistent updates on the Saquon Barkley situation. Where with Jacobs, it really hasn't been much. Obviously, we know he's not there. Obviously, it seems that he may be a little more inclined to hold out than Saquon would have. Or who knows what Jonathan Taylor's thinking. They cannot rescind that tag. They cannot rescind that tag. And whether it's to let him walk or whatever, they need to work something out and get him back on the football field, because Zamir White and Amir Abdullah and Brandon Bull, I don't even know if they still have Amir Abdullah.
I believe they do. I checked the depth chart earlier today because I was curious as well. I believe Abdullah is still around.
Oh, thank God.
And your season's saved.
But this is the thing. Like, I think a lot of the worry last year was that McDaniels was clearly cleaning house from a lot of Gruden guys. And he even did it again this offseason in getting rid of Darren Waller. And so that was the worry last year, was that, like, oh, Jacobs isn't a McDaniels guy, so McDaniels isn't going to lean on him. And God, was everyone so fucking wrong. Like, not only did they, like, they leaned on him almost more than any other player in the league got leaned on. But
300 touch season.
And he still has that ability. And what is he, 25? I think he's 25. I think he's a year
25.
younger.
Yep.
Then, so, like, he's getting close to that age of, what do they say, age 26 is the year where you start falling off. Obviously, he's very close, but he's never had any long-term injuries. He's shown no signs of slowing down. He just had the best year of his career in an offense that was okay at best, like 6 out of 10 offense. I don't know what they would do without him in a Jimmy G offense. In a Jimmy G offense, you need a running game. And you're not going to get a running game with Zamir White. And again, we're gonna talk more about that offense a little bit later, but from a football standpoint, just from their own sake, let alone the Chiefs or the Broncos getting him, that's a whole different story. But just from the sake of their outlook this year, and I mean, as much as I joked about the whoa, they're not gonna compete. Like, I think my dad was like, did you see the Raiders over under at 6.5? I'm like, 6.5, and he thought that was low, and I thought it was high. Like, I was surprised it was that high, and he was surprised it was that low. I'm like, you can have fun betting the over on that one. I'm like, I'm sure as hell not gonna do it, but like, I thought it was gonna be like 4.5. So, like,
right. That's
I just don't know what the direction is there, and getting rid of Jacobs would greatly impact their identity and where they're heading going forward, and they just can't do it. I cannot be content with them doing that.
I will say this much about Jacobs and the workload he got last year. Look, I don't know if this would affect how the Raiders think about him, but I think it should affect how fantasy owners, potential managers feel about him. It is from ESPN's article on fantasy football players to avoid 2023. And look, I don't just blindly follow these articles because somebody tells me not to draft him, but very interesting stat here. Entering 2022, a mere 8 running backs received 310 or more rushing attempts in a season over the past decade. Here are their results next season. All of them fell off or got hurt. I mean, Adrian Peterson rushed for, 327 times for the 2015 Vikings. Injuries kept him to 13 games over the next 2 seasons. Le'Veon Bell topped 300 rushing attempts one time in 2017, then he held out. Dalvin Cook slid past 310 rushing attempts over 14 games in 2020. Next season and the next season in 1 fewer game, had 63 fewer attempts and more than 100 fewer points. Basically, massive fall off for anybody that gets 310 or more rushing attempts, except for Derrick Henry because he's a freak.
We've made it clear that Derrick Henry and then Adrian Peterson a few years back, they're outliers. They don't count. They do not count.
He's an alien. So I am very weary of drafting Josh Jacobs in fantasy. Maybe the Raiders are weary of the same thing. Maybe Josh McDaniels, this was his plan all along. Run Josh Jacobs into the ground and then get rid of him.
And then get fired.
And then get fired. I mean, and then go back to the Patriots and be offensive coordinator for the 75th time. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me.
Also having a little fun in our chat here with one Gary Plord. Not sure who that is. Thoughts on Puka Nacua? I just heard of this man today.
Puka.
So I asked Gary if he had any thoughts on these nuts. So and I don't think people in the chat realize that we know Gary very well. So they think I'm just throwing a stray at some random listener. I'm not doing that.
I will say, I think Gary's trying to just throw like one of the funnier and more random camp names at us. Puka Nacua, unironically, could have a role this year. The Rams have no receivers beyond Cooper Kupp, and it's a guy who's been flashing in camp. And again, you don't want to fall into that pit of just camp hype. But like, all he has to do is beat out Van Jefferson. Like,
Tutu Atwell is there too.
Yeah, So they've got Tutu, they've got Puka. I done talking about Rams receivers because their names sound like sound effects. One more running back here. Another J name running back who just decides not to show up to work. We've got J.K. Dobbins. Pat, I hate to do this. I mean, it's not news, but I guess no news is the news, right? As we continue to progress through camp. J.K. Dobbins still not showing up to camp. Final year of his rookie deal. I found myself thinking, like, why is J.K. Dobbins not showing up after he's done not much in his first few years because he's been hurt? And then I'm like, okay.
He has not warranted a holdout at all.
No,
he hasn't. This is.
But here's the thing. He is in the final year of his rookie deal. I mean, we don't know how much money he's looking for. He may just be looking for, security. Like, do the Ravens like me? Do they want to keep me around? If so, extend me. Like, I don't want to head into this offseason as a free agent. I just want some kind of extension. J.K. Dobbins is obviously not a guy who's going to reset the market. I mean, that's something that could have been on the table for Saquon, maybe in another universe be on the table for Josh Jacobs based on production. J.K. Dobbins is not a guy that's going to even warrant that conversation, but still, him not being here is concerning, and it starts to make you wonder about Gus Edwards being
all aboard the
Gus
here. Bus.
The Gus bus could be open for business once again, as I think I got a notification here. Gus Edwards on changes under Todd Monken says, it's a great opportunity to see some lighter boxes. In the past, as you guys are aware, we had to run through some tougher boxes. Great opportunity to get our running backs in some space, and we're making the best of it.
Word?
The Gus hype
is
continuing.
Boing sound effect when you need it?
Boing, boing, boing. I also want to make a note here, Pat. I guess maybe we jumped the gun here on Kareem Hunt.
I was going to say, I saw the same report.
That there is a report from Adam Schefter. Free agent Kareem Hunt had what was called a great visit with the Saints and is now on his way to Indianapolis to meet with the Colts. What a surprise.
He's
going to Indy.
Which would be a way better opportunity for him.
Yes, absolutely.
Regardless of Jonathan Taylor. If Jonathan Taylor plays, he would be the clear-cut number 2 over guys like Deion Jackson and whoever else. Apologies to the currently third-string running back after the Zach Moss injury.
They signed Kenyon Drake as well. That name already came up, but I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, Kenyon Drake is in Indy, so I mean, I don't fucking care, but it's my job to inform the masses that Kenyon Drake is in fact a Colt, and I guess could theoretically factor into this running back room if Jonathan Taylor's out. If Jonathan Taylor's here, Kenyon Drake is dust, but Kareem Hunt visiting the Colts is interesting as this Jonathan Taylor saga continues.
Yeah, and I will say one more thing, kind of go back to Dobbins. I just think that if you're the Ravens, and if he says, hey, I'm in the final year of my contract and I kind of want to be extended, if I'm the Ravens, I just say no. Like, you can say that some of these guys, like the Giants with Saquon and the Raiders with Jacobs and now the Colts, those 3 guys have warranted a big extension. Those are cream of the crop running backs in this league. J.K. Dobbins is not. And he's incredibly talented. He looked really good last year at the end of the year, but he's barely been on the field. Like, especially we've talked about it weeks on end now about how running backs are breaking down faster and they have the shortest lifespan of any position. Mm-hmm. Why would a team commit to a guy like that who, I didn't even know he was holding out until I read about it the other day. Like, I thought he was kind of just hurt. Like, I didn't realize that that this was more than that. But
it's the most low-key holdout of
if
all time.
I'm the Ravens, I'm standing pat here. Because there's always that wild stat that goes around of it's like yards per carry all time, and like Gus Edwards Gus Edwards is in like the top 5. Like my man averages over 5 yards a carry, and I get that he has zero relevance in the passing game, and they're gonna throw it more under Todd Monken. But like you said, it might clear the box more. But I still like any lead running back in this Ravens. Obviously, at the point last year when they had like Kenyon Drake, and then
I like Lamar Jackson too.
Well, yeah, exactly. But
he's the lead running back.
It's still gonna work. Like if J.K. Dobbins is it doesn't show up or isn't out, Gus Edwards is a starter. I mean, he's more of a high end flex, but he is a He is a surefire starter, I think. But I don't think this one's really going to go anywhere because I just don't think Dobbins has any kind of leverage in the same way that Jacobs and Taylor do. Because I'm sure the Ravens, if they're like, all right, he's out, I'm sure they'll just go on with what they were trying to do with or without him.
So it's times like these that I'm really glad I have tweet notifications on for NFL 32 beat writers. If you guys aren't following them on Twitter and or X, whatever, you're missing out. They are a great, conglomeration of all of the beat writer news that's coming out through camp. My phone blows up constantly throughout the day because I have Twitter notifications on for them, but it's worth it. And there's a couple of quotes coming out right now, Pat, one specifically on J.K. Dobbins, as you were talking. John Harbaugh on why he thinks J.K. Dobbins will return soon. Generally speaking, to be a great player, you need to put in the time and effort and get with the team and just get right. And he wants to do that in this case, and that's why I expect him back here pretty soon. This is notable because, as we know, John Harbaugh has been in communication with J.K. Dobbins. This has not been a zero dark 30 situation. So he's talking to him, and if he believes that Dobbins is going to be back soon, he probably will. This could just be a shorter holdout. We'll see what happens. But if he's back, and if he's healthy, Pat, we've talked about it a million times, one of our favorite, dead zone or even post-dead zone RB targets because of the talent and because of what this offense can do.
Absolutely.
So very interesting here. And one more piece of news that I just want to throw up. The Vikings signed N'Keal Harry, Pat, and they're giving him number 28. So that's fucking horrific.
See, I know that,
I hate that, but
I know that, out of every sport, football is, really, not... really tough on retiring numbers. There's a lot of, as opposed to baseball, where the Yankees will probably fucking retire Brett Gardner's number for some reason.
I know,
yeah. but that's insane. That they've had a lot of good players, Fran Tarkenton and stuff, and he's one of their best players in franchise history. And not only do they not have the number retired, but they're giving it to N'Keal Harry.
Bro, seeing him wear Adrian Peterson's number is going to make me vomit all over myself, especially that he is now sharing a wide receiver core with Jalen Reagor. So you've just got the terrible twosome of just some of the most painful receiver busts of the past 5 years.
And they used to have Laquan Treadwell.
Oh my God! At least they drafted him though, right?
Yes, they did draft him. I think he's in Jacksonville these days.
Yeah, instead of adopting these just bum receivers, at least they drafted that one. But I don't know, whatever. Justin Jefferson's going to get 300 targets this year. That's really all this tells me. Let's move on to the viewer mailbag, Pat. In prior shows, and basically every show we've done, we end the show with some viewer questions. But this one, I wanted to go a little heavier on the viewer questions. And to do that, I also want to intro it in a very special way.
We just got a letter. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. Wonder who it's from.
We got lots of letters from you guys. A lot of good questions.
I guess we used to be heavy on sports. Now we're heavy on viewer questions.
We're heavy. Yeah, heavy on sports can lick the underside of my thigh. Anyway, we'll go into our first question here. This one, so it's a mix of questions from YouTube and Instagram and wherever else. While I'm thinking of it, by the way, guys, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in, by the way. The show will be up on Spotify, Apple, and any other podcast platform shortly after the show ends. So if you guys ever can't tune in live or just want to go back and listen to the show, you can do that on any podcast audio platform. We exist everywhere. But this first question comes from... This first question comes
and guys,
from
too,
YouTube.
we talked about how we got to 1K last week. We got over 200 followers since last week's podcast. So Thank you guys for all the love. We've only been at this for a couple months now with the new format. So the support means for you guys watching now, listening later, subscribing, following, whatever, interacting. We love you guys.
1,230 subs on YouTube now, steadily rising in audio viewership as well, or listenership, I guess. And currently 19 concurrent viewers on here, which is a little bit higher than it was when we first started. So hell yeah, things are going in the right direction. This first question was from YouTube, and it's from user RennieK4903. He says, quarterbacks seem to be going early this year. How much do you guys want a top 5 quarterback? And if so, where are or aren't you drafting them? So I think we're on the same page here, Pat. One thing I'll say is that I do see the upside and the value of having these early quarterbacks. I mean, you have Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. You're going to be feeling really, really good about that position every week. You are never going to have to touch it. You're never going to have to take them out unless they're hurt or it's their bye week. And that's amazing. The only concern I have, especially in 12-teamers, which is the optimal way to play fantasy football, in my humble opinion, is that, third round pick or even second round pick that you have to spend to get one of these elite quarterbacks. There are so many great skill players available in those rounds that you miss out on one of them to take a quarterback. I just don't like how my teams come together when I do that, because then, yes, I have Mahomes as my quarterback, but then my wide receiver too is somebody much less desirable. I think the quarterback sweet spot this year is the quarterbacks from the 6 to 9 range, where you've got Justin Fields, who will probably be a guy who goes overdrafted in some leagues just because of the rushing upside. I think people will fall in love with his name a little bit, but he's ranked currently, around this range with himself, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, and Deshaun Watson. I mean, fuck that guy, but he's got a great amount of upside as well. And then, say you miss out on all those guys, if Anthony Richardson gets named the starter, I am very interested in drafting him and maybe pairing him with a safer guy as well, like a Kirk Cousins or something to that effect, seeing if Richardson works out. Because Richardson could be a league winner with the rushing upside that he has. So,
I said it
the
too
6 to 9 range.
In our sleeper draft, I am a huge Tua Tagovailoa fan this year. Granted, his brain stays together, but I think sky's the limit there. And I believe he's like QB 10, 11? I think his stock's going up a bit, but he's another guy I love. And so basically, I agree with a lot of things. Like I was telling Bran before we start in our team, in our league, I'm picking 12, 13, and I'm intrigued by one of the top quarterbacks there to just kind of maybe even just go rogue a little bit. But in years past, when I've like mocked it out and it happens, there's always another position lacking, either running back or receiver. And but it is just so nice to know that you are going to get 25 points a week. And, like, sure, you could kind of go really – but I think, that, like we said, this QB position is, like, 10 deep this year. If we go all the way down to, like, Tua at 10, it's not like years past where you get down to, like, the 9, 10, 11 where we've had, like, the Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, Derek Carr, where it's more like these boring, dependable guys. Like, I think these are guys with real upside going at the bottom of the QB1 range. So as appealing as Mahomes and Hurts and Jackson and Allen are – I think it's okay to wait, but I'm not necessarily like opposed to it. It's going to be, for me in my drafts, it's kind of going to be a spur of the moment thing. Like, I'm not going to take a guy in the second or third round, the skill position player that I don't love. If I don't love any of those guys, I'm going to take one of the top quarterbacks. But I still think the way to go with quarterback is give it a little time. But that being said, this is true in our league, and I'm sure in a lot of others. When one quarterback goes, they start flying. More so than any other position. They start flying. So you've just got to, like I said, in my chance, I'm going to be picking 20, 22 picks apart. So if I don't take a quarterback, who knows who the hell is going to be there in my next chance? So it's all about risk. It's all about your league. It's all about knowing. But I'm always been more of a wait on it guy.
Yeah, you can win fantasy football leagues and construct teams with really any strategy that you come up with other than, taking a kicker in the first round. So we're not here to tell you what the best way is, but if you're asking our opinion, we are both wait on quarterback guys, especially this year, because I think to me, this is almost the worst year to spend an early pick on a quarterback because of the fact that these elite guys have risen the ranks so much because of what happened last year. Last year, if you didn't have one of the top 3 guys, you were really struggling from, I guess, top 4, Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Hurts. We're so far above everybody else that you were at a disadvantage if you didn't have one of those guys. You look back at fantasy prior years, that's never been the case. That's why drafting quarterbacks mid to late has always been considered a safe strategy. I'm not sitting here willing to say that what happened this past year is the new norm. I think we are going to get back to, having 7, 8, 20-plus point per game quarterbacks, and then, some guys that are a little bit later that can still get you 15, 16. I just think there's really nice quarterback depth this year, so I am not taking one early. If you want to, again, look, if you really love Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes, it's not going to kill you. Like, those guys are going to put up 25 points a night probably, so it's not going to kill you. It's just not optimal, in my opinion. This question from Instagram, Marcus Lock 80S. I don't know how to read some of these. Which second-year quarterback, Pickett, Howell, Ritter, will perform the best? So Pat and I think, are in agreement. We've talked up Kenny Pickett here.
I think it's a pretty obvious question, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny Pickett's in, I think, the most stable situation with an experienced coach like Mike Tomlin, good receivers with Deontay Johnson, a rising George Pickens. You've got Pat Freiermuth. You've got Darnell Washington, who apparently is catching a bunch of touchdowns in camp right now. And then you've got a couple of solid running backs on this team. I think Pickett is probably going to be the best performing one. I want to say, though, that all 3 of these guys, whether you realize it or not, have pretty good rushing upside. They all ran quite a bit in college. Desmond Ridder, I know, had a year where he ran for 12 touchdowns. And Sam Howell, fun fact, I actually have the number here for what he did his final year at UNC. So in 2021, he had 183 carries for 828 yards and 11 touchdowns. I don't know if people realize he ran that much at UNC. And then in his only start last year, 5 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown. So he's a mobile guy. He's not a fast guy. His 40 time is like in the 5s, like low 5s. So he's not a quick guy, but he's a guy that's willing to run, can maybe, wiggle past some of these defenders, like the mobility of what we used to see with like Aaron Rodgers and Andrew Luck, those kind of guys. And if he's going to be rushing like that, he's got a big arm as well. People have touted that he's got a really, really nice deep ball, and having receivers like Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel, he's got nice weapons around him. It wouldn't shock me, Pat, if Sam Howell was the better fantasy performer this upcoming season. Yes, I'm going to pick Pickett to do it, but Howell would not surprise me. Howell's lone game last year, which, yes, it was in Week 18, so say whatever you want to about that, but he put up about 18 fantasy points. Kenny Pickett, who started majority of last season after taking over for Trubisky, had only one game with more points than that. So, I mean, look, it's a 1-game sample size for Howell, but I like the talent, and I like the fantasy upside, I guess, at the very least.
Yeah, I agree that the answer is Pickett, and you talk about the rushing upside, and obviously he was just the most skilled guy in college, the most dynamic of those 3 in college. Excuse me. But one thing I do want to talk about, because I see just a lot of Desmond Ridder. I'm not going to call it slander, because obviously the dude's not great, but I'm seeing a lot of anti-Desmond Ridder sentiment, on Twitter
Most
and
of
everywhere.
it from me.
And which is fair, because, we have, a lot from you. There's a lot that we haven't seen. We haven't seen a lot from this guy, and there's also the concern that this offense is going to run a lot. And I don't know how I feel about him as a real-life quarterback. But I think it's being undersold in terms of fantasy, in terms of the value of, especially a guy like Drake London. We're going to talk more about Drake London as well later, spoiler alert. But so I don't want to go too far into it now. But I don't think him or Howell really are going to be these kind of fantasy relevant guys. But they're definitely going to be good enough to keep their teammates relevant and keep a sturdy offense going. But as for Pickett, I mean, if you're taking a late flyer on a second quarterback, especially in best ball, I think he's a great late round best ball pick, later round dynasty pick. But yeah, when you look at it, there's a pretty mid class there from 2 years ago. There's not a whole lot of we like Pickett, but the best were kind of like, yeah, he can be solid. The sky is not the limit for these 3, it seems.
No, and we're not projecting a massive leap for Kenny Pickett. We're just kind of hoping at this point. Sam Howell, one thing to note too, as optimistic as I am about him, look, 5th round pick in 2022. You could make the argument that he was maybe underdrafted in that draft, but as a 5th rounder, there's an ever-present risk of, they haven't committed much, if anything, to him, and if he's not good, Jacoby Brissett's always there waiting in the wings. So, I don't know. I think as long as Sam Howell's on the field, you're going to get some decent production in the right matchups. So, that's why I like him for fantasy as a dart throw player. Ridder, not as much, just because I don't believe in the arm. And then Pickett is kind of the mix of the two, right, where he's just, we're hoping he's going to be maybe a franchise quarterback, and he's a decent passer, decent runner, and we just hope that it kind of all comes together.
He's definitely the most franchise quarterback, quote unquote, of the 3.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, that's you could tell that just by the draft capital alone, so it makes sense. Sticking with the quarterback theme here, so YouTube question from Ben B21: how do you rank the quarterbacks fantasy wise? Is Mahomes the clear number 1 pick at quarterback? So this this is interesting, considering that Pat and I are not really super strongly considering taking one of these guys, or at least we prefer not to. So, but how would we rank them? So our rankings are slightly different. I don't believe that Patrick Mahomes is the clear number 1 pick at quarterback. I would go with Jalen Hurts first, then Mahomes, then Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. Pat, I see your rankings here. You've got Mahomes at 1, and then Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, so similar, and then Jackson, so similar top 4, just swapping Hurts and Mahomes. And then you've got Herbert as your 5 instead of Burrow. I like that because I love Justin Herbert, but I like the take to put him right above Burrow.
Yeah. The thing I'll say about Mahomes versus Hurts obviously has crazy rushing upside, especially, what do they call it, the tush push, they call that in Philly, where they just line up behind him and shove him into the end zone.
The unstoppable QB sneak that was not banned.
Which I'm shocked it wasn't banned. I think it might be, depending on how much it's used this year, but we'll talk about that next year. But
they'll ban it after week 1.
But
after Hurts does it 6 times.
The rushing upside is insane, and he's obviously, again, not the best passer, but he had improved greatly last year, and it's there. But the way I see it with Mahomes, obviously he's not a runner in the way that Hurts or Jackson or Justin Fields is. But the dude's got a really strong rushing floor. Like, he can run, he can scramble, especially towards the end zone. And just the fact that this dude is probably the most talented quarterback, in NFL history. I mean, we'll see if he goes down as the best someday in terms of accolades, but the dude is just a freak of nature in an Andy Reid offense with Travis Kelce, and they know how to, find guys like Jerick McKinnon to pepper them, and we'll see how some of these young receivers play out. But I just think it's such a good quarterback in such a good situation, despite less rushing upside than Jalen Hurts. Still give me Patrick Mahomes if I have to take a quarterback be the first guy in my league to take a quarterback. But Hurts, I understand. Like out of the running guys, I think Hurts is definitely the guy.
Yeah, and speaking of Mahomes rushing, so last year actually his most productive rushing season from a fantasy perspective at least, 61 carries for 358 yards and 4 touchdowns. Every year before that as a starter, he had exactly 2 touchdowns. So found the end zone a couple of extra times, and rushing yards comparable to the season before where he had 381, but the past 2 seasons have been his best each rushing yards. So look, I get it with Mahomes being easily the most talented quarterback. I'm just looking at his fantasy points from last year and where he finished above guys. So 371 for Mahomes, Josh Allen QB2 358, and then Jalen Hurts QB3 at 340. So these guys were kind of consolidated at the top. The reason I lean Jalen Hurts, and maybe I'm playing myself here, and I very well could be because Mahomes has shown that this doesn't matter for him. It's just that how do you get a better fantasy prototype quarterback than Jalen Hurts? And you look at his talent, right? He's a crazy runner with the ball. The rushing upside is massive, more so than maybe any other quarterback in the league. I mean, even more so potentially than Lamar Jackson just because of the O-line and how the offense is structured. Then you surround him with arguably the best wide receiver duo in the league. I mean, yes, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle will have an argument for this, but A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith is virtually as good as it gets. So you've got elite weapons, Dallas Goedert as the tight end. They bring in DeAndre Swift as a receiving threat out of the backfield. And like I said, the O-line is so good that I look at Mahomes. So Mahomes does it no matter what you put around him. I'm just like, if I'm going to pick out of these two guys, I'm going to pick the one that has a few more weapons and sort of a more not stable system around him, because I mean any Andy Reid system is going to be plenty stable. We've seen Patrick Mahomes do this so many times, but I just feel good about every little aspect of what Jalen Hurts has around him. Mahomes, no matter what, the lack of receivers to me will always that's how I'm going to split these hairs, right? And I understand that he basically had no receivers last year and he was QB1. What's the difference this year? All he did was lose Juju Smith-Schuster and replace him with, I mean, I guess Sky Moore playing more, lol, and boo. And Kadarius Toney, if he actually provides anything. So I'm sure it doesn't really matter for Mahomes. But if I have to split the hairs between these two, I'm just going to pick the guy with more rushing upside and a better supporting cast, even though that Patrick Mahomes is the better quarterback. That's what it comes down to. And then these guys, beyond them, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, a lot of rushing upside for those guys as well. Jackson, I think you and I are both banking on a pretty strong bounce back year from him, but this is also pretty in line with where he's being ranked. I think everybody's banking on him not being as injured this year and, not held back by the situations last year. He's got probably the best receiver group that he's ever played with. I mean, there's no Hollywood Brown, but Zay Flowers is getting a ton of hype. Odell Beckham could hopefully do literally anything. So I don't know. Maybe it won't be as good as some of the receiver groups headlined by Hollywood Brown, but it'll at least be solid. Pat, you want to defend the Herbert over Burrow take here a little bit?
I just think a lot of the talk coming out of the Chargers is just that the biggest difference is going to be the checkdowns are gone. Basically, like they are going to let Justin Herbert sling it, and he has 2 incredible deep threat weapons in Mike Williams and Quentin Johnston. We'll talk a little bit about Quentin Johnston later as well, but I just think that he was being so held back last year. It was Joe Lombardi, right? Yeah, absolute bum. He had one of the worst depth of targets in the league, and I mean, if you were an Austin Eckler owner, you absolutely loved that, but. Obviously, I think Burrow's number 6. I think Burrow is probably going to be a little more steady as he goes kind of guy, but I think Herbert's got a lot of upside. And, this is a guy that's been, trying to break into the elite category this year, and which was what we saw Burrow do last year. And I think Herbert is basically this year's version of Joe Burrow, a guy who everyone knows is good. Everyone knows he's talented, but I think he's really going to, cement himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
And I think it's a totally reasonable take. People may look at you having Herbert above Burrow and be like, how can you justify that? Well, here's how. Justin Herbert was QB2 2 years ago. It was not that long ago. Don't let the recency bias tell you that, Burrow is this clear-cut, gonna finish above Justin Herbert in fantasy kind of guy. Like, these are all guys who are on the same sort of tier, and Justin Herbert, we have seen him do this before. It just may feel like a distant memory because of how bad last year was, but I do think that Kellen Moore is going to help unlock Justin Herbert. I do think Quentin Johnston will help, and overall, I'm expecting a much better year for Justin Herbert. I don't see him ranked over Burrow too often, so I respect the balls that you got there. Next question from DJ DY Supreme on YouTube. What are your thoughts on Ramondre Stevenson? He's an RB1 with Belichick as his coach, so you never know what his workload will be like until the season starts. Is he worth the risk? So this question got me to dig into Ramondre a little bit more, Pat, and I think as a Patriots fan, if you guys don't know, I was actually a little sour on Ramondre Stevenson for fantasy. I've come around a bit, and here's why. The carry totals that you look at, or the touch totals for Patriots running backs, have kind of been all over the place in recent years. The only one to reach 300, touches over the past several years was LeGarrette Blount, the year he scored a bajillion touchdowns. And then Stephen Ridley got fairly close in 2012. I believe it was like 270 something. But other than that, last season for Ramondre Stevenson, he had 279 total touches, which, obviously puts him very high up in that tier. And that just tells me it's a reflection of Ramondre may be the best, most talented running back this team has had in a long time. And so if they reward that and they use him properly, knowing that, then yeah, I could see him being worth, quote unquote, the risk. The concern is that this is a Belichick backfield. They do involve so many running backs, and obviously the Patriots have been looking pretty hard to add a running back. They've worked out Leonard Fournette. They've worked out Zeke. As of this recording, nobody has signed yet, but it does tell me that they are actively searching for competition. Ramondre didn't score very much at the goal line last year en route to a solid fantasy finish. I think even if they do sign somebody that takes some of that work, they might be okay. And I think with Ramondre, you might be reaping the benefits of an offense that's just overall better this season. So, look, the risks are there. I feel more comfortable with him as my RB2, even though that might be considered, sort of an embarrassment of riches depending on how you're drafting. But I think you can look at it both ways. I'm coming around just because of the talent, but I also understand the risk in betting on any individual player in a Belichick backfield. But we've seen it before. It's just, are we going to see it this year with Stevenson?
Yeah, I was really, really high on Stevenson going into it. I've kind of faded a little bit, only just because of, like you said, these visits coming in from Zeke and Fournette, who are probably only going to hurt him in the end zone.
Yes.
And they're better, they're similar players to Damian Harris, just a bit older. So, but if they don't bring someone in, if it is just Ramondre Stevenson in the band of misfits, Ty Montgomery and Pierre Strong,
Kevin Harris, yeah,
all aboard, man. Like, he has such a good opportunity in this current roster makeup right now to be an RB1. With the usage he's going to get, with the upside he has, with the pass-catching upside he has. And he can do it. This guy could probably be a 3-down back, but the only thing is he's never really had a workload like this. Like, even in, 2 years at Oklahoma, he in his first season, he only had 65 carries the whole season. And then, obviously, his second one, he had some issues with suspension, and he was out. He only played 6 games. And then, obviously, he's had Damian Harris kind of booning him a little bit in terms of carries. So we've never really seen him have a bell cow kind of situation, whether we don't see that in Bill Belichick a lot, but we've never seen it from him. That's the only little concern for me. But if they let him cook and they let him be that guy, I think the sky is the fucking limit for Ramondre Stevenson. But again, we could be here next week and Ezekiel Elliott could be a Patriot and we could be singing a completely different tune. But I'm saying this as of the roster makeup right now.
Yeah, and looking at where he's ranked on Fantasy Pros in terms of running back, so he is RB10, which again is why I said getting him as an RB2 would be, you're taking running backs in the first 2 rounds, and that is how I would, maybe approach the draft. But I also think in round 2, I prefer to get a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown or Garrett Wilson or whatever, wherever Ramondre may be available. But I do see the upside. He's a very, very talented running back, and he's, going around Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon, who each of those guys I think I have some more. Those guys are all behind Stevenson according to Fantasy Pros, but each of those guys have bigger question marks to me than Ramondre does right now. That will change again, like you said, if the Patriots go out and sign Zeke. But for now, Harris, so unproductive last year. Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby's taken the world by storm apparently, and then Joe Mixon just waning efficiency. If Stevenson remains the biggest name in this backfield come week 1, I don't think there's a ton of risk, or at least not as an equal amount of risk as all the other running backs in this range. Yeah. This question from Zach and Sports on YouTube. With new quarterbacks in the picture, do you think past consistent guys like Mike Evans, Michael Pittman Jr., and Davante Adams are still very viable options? Pat, I see your note here.
It's the first thing I said when I read the question, and I said, has Michael Pittman been a very viable option? And based on the finishes, kind of. But it was like that meme where it's like the army guys and then the clown. Just that just feels like with
Evans,
Adams and then Michael Pittman. Yeah, not to say, but I've just never really considered him to be amongst that group. But based on the finishes, he's been close to a wide receiver too. Obviously, the hype train was crazy for him last year, and looking back, it never should have been because Matt Ryan was old and dirt and whatever. Mm-hmm. But I'm definitely the most scared of him by far. I don't know why both of us kind of overlooked him, I think, in the bus draft. I just didn't even think of him at all. For whatever reason, he just completely slipped my mind. And what is he even going as? He's not going particularly high, right?
So for me, after looking today, that's why I didn't put him in the bus draft. I mean, to be honest, he's rated, I think Fantasy Pros has him as wide receiver 34.
Oh, God. So that's barely
wide receiver
a flex.
34. Yeah, wide receiver 34, and his 2 finishes outside of his rookie year have been wide receiver 17 and wide receiver 20. So, I mean, the odds that he outproduces his ADP, even with a rookie quarterback, are still pretty freaking high. But it's just not a guy that you are going to feel good about on a week-to-week basis.
I don't feel good about it just because of the situation. Even if it is Gardner Minshew, who we've seen at least to be, to be a viable passer, I still don't know what to think of that offense, even under Shane Steichen. But then Anthony Richardson is just such a question mark. For fantasy, we're all like, yeah, Anthony Richardson because he runs the ball and all this stuff. But I'm worried about him. But again, the ADP at that point is kind of just like, sure, why not? But even then, I'm just pretty much out on him as opposed to these other two guys. Even though Davante Adams was the captain of my all bust team.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's more so of the fact that he's going in the first round as a top wide receiver. I don't think he's that. I mean, I kind of view him more as a low end wide receiver 1 this year because the floor is still there. He's Davante Adams, and someone's got to catch these Jimmy G dump offs, and it's going to be him a lot. But just losing, Derek Carr didn't necessarily throw the deep ball well, but he threw the deep ball a lot, and obviously Adams is such a skilled guy that it was going to happen. That, he was going to make things happen. And losing that kills, not kills it, but it cuts his upside a lot. And just where he's going, I just don't feel comfortable. But at the end of the day, he is Davante Adams. And if you're looking for a safe pick there in the early second round, even the late first round, I wouldn't do it. But early second round, if you're looking for a safer option, sure. But I think there are a lot of guys. You mentioned Amon-Ra, you mentioned Garrett Wilson, guys who probably have more upside than him, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Davante is definitely a little lower on my ranks probably than those guys. Or, I mean, even if he's not lower on my ranks, I may pick one of those guys over him just to chase that ceiling just a tad. To me, Pat, if I have to categorize any of these guys as still being very viable, as Zach in Sports says, Davante is the guy.
Yes.
He's still going to be a viable wide receiver 1 for sure. These other 2 guys, Pittman, like we said, has never really been there. And then Mike Evans concerns me because his very viability stopped last year with Tom Brady. He became more of to compare him to another Mike, he became more of a Mike Williams, where you were going to have these spike weeks and then these weeks where he completely disappears.
Even Mike Williams was more consistent than him last year by a good amount.
Yeah, and to see that with Tom Brady, even though it was one of Tom Brady's worst years in his last year, it's concerning because even I think anybody would take a 40-whatever-year-old Tom Brady over what they're dealing with right now in Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. And yes, we talked about how this Buccaneers situation could turn out like a diet version of the Seahawks last year where everybody writes them off and maybe they get good enough quarterback play.
I'll say, though, I think that's only the case if it's Baker Mayfield.
That's fair.
And the Bucs are playing games. They released their first depth chart, and the QB1 was Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask.
Yeah.
That's what it said. And Adam Schefter tweeted, like, I have never seen an or on a depth chart before. So they're clearly playing games. Like, they have a completely open battle, and we don't know what Kyle Trask can do. And obviously we know what Baker Mayfield can do, and I think he can be a very passable quarterback, someone who can kind of maintain an offense. But even then, even if it's Baker, I prefer Chris Godwin by a lot because Baker loves the slot, loves throwing to the slot, and that's going to be Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's going to be the guy gobbling up all these passes, and who knows? Evans is going to be a little more touchdown dependent, and I just don't like it. But again, if you're taking Evans as like a guy that's going to be in your flex conversation, sure. But even then, I still think there are probably other guys in that range that I would rather have. Again, not sure where he is.
So, Fantasy Pros, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are right next to each other at numbers 66 and 67 overall. So you're looking at.
And who do they have ahead? They have Evans ahead?
Evans ahead by one spot.
Wow, yeah. That's shocking to me. Honestly, that is shocking.
Yeah, Evans, just the complete lack of consistency last year makes me kind of out on him. But Godwin, Pat, I'm totally with you. He is a guy that even fourth round or at the very least fifth round, I'm very interested in because he's a guy you look at Godwin and you look at the Buccaneers offense, like there's not a team that's going to score 0 points all season. Like, so they're going to move the ball, and Godwin's probably going to be the vehicle through which they move the ball.
Wait a minute, though. Who is Chris Godwin?
Yeah, Pat, these inside jokes on a podcast are not, unless now I got to explain it. Okay. So Pat and I had a situation a couple years ago where what was it? You had Saquon Barkley.
And it was when he had the high ankle sprain.
Saquon had a high ankle sprain. He was going to miss a couple months. I had a very good record at the time. You had a very bad record.
I think I was like 1-2. Like I needed something.
Yeah.
I couldn't lose. I couldn't keep losing.
Crux of the deal was I sent Chris Godwin for Saquon Barkley, knowing that I could afford to let Saquon sit and then get him back for the playoff push, which I did, and I believe I won that year. So I think
and
it played
popped
out.
off in the last week, and I got a lot of shit for it. But Chris Godwin was wide receiver 2 that year, and I was still catching shit all year. Like the man besides Michael Thomas was literally the best wide receiver in fantasy football that year, and I was still catching strays, and that was the big one. Like who is Godwin? Like Godwin would have like 9 catches for 152 and a touchdown, and people would still be like, who? So
basically we made that deal, and people. So
oh my god, you would have thought someone like it was like Oppenheimer, someone dropped the fucking nuke or something.
Not to pull back the curtain on my fantasy reputation or this league too much, but people view me as kind of the terrorist of this fantasy league. And so when I made a move like that, clearly trading for a guy who was an upside play for a championship run, and I traded a guy who was mostly unproven to that point, but like was still worthy of that deal at that point. I mean, it wasn't like he was unproductive or a bad receiver. So everyone, a couple of our league mates were like, who is Chris Godwin? They're trading Chris Godwin for that? Like, who even is that? And I'm just, they know who Chris Godwin is. But
and the best part was that I remember like right before, like I did the deal immediately and then like umpired a baseball game. So I was like AWOL for 2 hours, and my God, was my phone lit the fuck up when I got back. But who is Chris Godwin? Chris Godwin is a very good wide receiver, and he is very viable than Mike Evans in this situation. Yeah. But looking at Mike Evans, there are a lot of guys around him that I like better, including Godwin. You look at guys like Hollywood Brown, Tyler Lockett, guys are, we talk about George Pickens, Jordan Addison, Jahan Dotson, guys with a lot more upside, with a lot more outcomes than Evans, where it's kind of just be like, does he catch a touchdown? Does he catch a big pass? Where in a Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask-led offense, I don't know. So even at his modest ADP, I'm kind of out on Mike Evans as well.
Yeah, I'm not excited by Mike Evans in the least. So, look, to answer your question, Pittman and Evans, not super viable. Devontae Adams, still viable, although I generally prefer other guys. Yeah. Devontae Adams is a guy that I would be thrilled to get if I had an early, like, top 3 pick and I got him in the second round. Then I'd be thrilled to get him there, but he's a guy that I am picking, Garrett Wilson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown over him at this point, just because Not that I don't believe in the talent, but the quarterback situation concerns me. And honestly, Pat, sorry to say this, the Raiders to me just feel like a sinking ship right now. And I don't want to invest too much in a team where it feels like things are going to get worse before they get better. It doesn't mean they'll get worse statistically too much. I mean, it's Devontae freaking Adams, but it's just, again, another situation where there's some bad vibes around the Raiders right now.
Yeah, as always.
Question from Biased Sports Fan on YouTube says, which wide receiver do you think will take the biggest leap this year? So my answer to this, and it's the easy one, is Garrett Wilson. Now, I mean, Garrett Wilson is on Fantasy Pros. What wide receiver is he right now? So he is wide receiver 10. The reason I have Garrett Wilson as my biggest breakout is it feels a lot like the year that I got Justin Jefferson in the second round at like pick 17, 18 overall or something to that extent, where this may be the last time you were able to get Garrett Wilson outside of the first round. Like, Garrett Wilson's a guy who came on last year, performed incredibly well whenever Zach Wilson was not on the field, and now he gets Aaron Rodgers. If he gets even average quarterback play, which he's probably going to get above average quarterback play, Garrett Wilson, it is well within his range of outcomes to finish as a top 5 wide receiver. So while there's not a ton of room for him to break out, because we've seen some of that production last year, it's a guy that I just think is going to go from one tier to the next, and I think could be a second round pick that you're going to get, at a value you will probably never get him at again. And to give a little bit more of a low key option, Sky Moore, I touched on him earlier. It's a guy that basically redshirted his rookie year. I mean, yes, he scored in the Super Bowl and played a little more as the season went on, but he is practicing now, pretty exclusively with the ones here in training camp. So things are looking good for him from a playing time perspective. And, the one thing I will say about him that is potentially, a downside that you have to keep in mind, even though I am optimistic about him being on the field, this tweet I thought provided some good perspective on the Chiefs offense from Jetpack Galileo on Twitter. Very good follow, in my opinion. He said, talking about Justin Watson, another Chiefs receiver, said Justin Watson is playing on the outside, and he is where he is because the scheme wants multiple deep speed threats to clear space for Kelsey. That's why MVS was a priority free agent and Mecole a priority pick without Tyreek around. Two field stretchers make space for the only receiver who matters, Travis Kelsey. So there's absolutely a world where Travis Kelsey is the only consistent receiver on this team, but Sky Moore is a guy that, seeing his, I guess, big playability and being on the Chiefs and maybe seeing such a large percentage of the snaps, it's a guy that I'm comfortable saying will take some sort of leap, whether that translates to, week-to-week fantasy viability, I don't know, but still a guy I'm keeping my eye on.
Yeah, obviously, Garrett Wilson is going to be great. And the only reason I didn't pick him is because I feel like he doesn't have as big of a leap possible to make.
Sure.
As opposed to this guy, Chris Olave, who I think is going to be...
Fellow Ohio State.
Who is going to be on par with Garrett Wilson in terms of production this year. He was fantastic last year in offenses with Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton. He was really, really good. And now he's going to get a guy like Derek Carr, who, again, loves to take the deep shot, and it's going to be Chris Olave there. And while it's like a busy offense, there's a lot of pieces in that offense. Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, the tight ends, Jawan Johnson, and then it was like my boy Rashid Shaheed. Oh, geez, no. But all those guys are just like kind of like okay or solid. Chris Olave is really, really good. Like, I think he's a few levels above any of these other guys in terms of potential and ability, and I'm not worried about this kind of muddy situation kind of limiting him. I think he is going to absolutely explode in where he's going at wide receiver. He's going as wide receiver 12 on, on Underdog, but still 19. And, again, this is best ball. Like, I'm sure. Where does Fantasy Pros have him? Where do they have
Fantasy
Olave?
Pros also has him at 12.
At 12. So, I mean, like, he's being tabbed as a low-end wide receiver 1. But I think at where he's going, in the late second round, early third round, that's fantastic.
And Chris Olave is a guy that you can take advantage of his ADP on certain platforms too, because especially ESPN, non-PPR, at least I have it in front of me, he's wide receiver 16. So
that's insane,
even more value to be had there.
That's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, like you can get good value there. And my under-the-radar guy, not as under-the-radar as Sky Moore, but Jahan Dotson in Washington. Really, really good at the end of the year when he came back from injury. He was seeing a good amount of targets. In the one game with Sam Howell, he had 3 catches for 72, so he's got some deep threat ability. We talked about Sam Howell's big arm. And even with McLaurin, besides those two, there's not a whole lot to go around. I mean, maybe Antonio Gibson, but he's not going to – that's more of a check-down threat. But I think this is an offense where there can be two guys doing really – doing a lot. And like I said, he's going behind guys we talked about, Mike Evans and Michael Pittman. I would much rather have Jahan Dotson than either of those two guys.
Yeah, Logan Thomas, a guy who's been a threat here and there. He's been injured for most of camp.
And his career.
Injuries and his career. Cole Turner is a guy who is standing out. But again, these are all speculative names. Whereas
De'Ami Brown.
Jahan Dotson's a guy who actually flashed last year and looked like he could be their best receiver.
And I'm really upset because in our draft, I took him in the last round. He was my last round pick.
Oh,
and
really?
then I dropped him before the year even started to pick up whoever. And
I
at the end of the year,
Jahan Dotson for a few weeks.
At the end of the year, looking back, I was just like, man, I threw a dart and I got it right. But again, it's just so hard to hit. But obviously, he's not going to be going that late. But he's very viable, and I agree with everything you said about Sky Moore. I just wanted to say two different guys than you did to talk about more people.
Absolutely.
And you beat me to answer all these questions.
Absolutely. And mainly because I picked the questions. This question is one that we do have the same answer on, Pat, coming from Instagram. C. Schaefer70 says, who is your favorite rookie wide receiver for fantasy football? I think as of right now, Pat, it's just so easy. It's Jordan Addison. I mean, you look at the rookie receivers. First of all, if your favorite rookie receiver is anybody selected outside of the first round, you're probably not going to get a ton of production, so don't pick them. But you
Sorry,
look at,
Jonathan Mingo lovers.
Yeah. I mean, look, maybe he is a thing, but the odds that he outproduces all these guys aren't super strong. So we're really looking between JSN, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, and Jordan Addison. I believe those are the only receivers taken in the first round.
Right.
But Jordan Addison, obviously the clearest path to playing time. I mean, all these other guys, maybe not Zay Flowers, but at least Johnston and JSN right now are wide receiver threes on their team. Addison is the clear two. I mean, and maybe it won't transpire from week one, but like from talent and the role that he is likely to get quickly, Addison's wide receiver too. I mean, ideally you let him sit on your bench for 2 weeks and see what's up and then plug him in. But Addison's my favorite receiver, clearest path to opportunity by a mile. And that Vikings team, especially with Dalvin Cook gone, is going to throw. And guess what? Justin Jefferson is going to command an awful lot of defensive attention, and someone's going to pick that up.
And even with TJ Hawkinson there, like obviously Adam Thielen had a bad year last year, but he's commanded a lot of targets in the last few years. There's still a lot of targets up for grabs in that offense. And like, say what you will about KJ Osborne, solid receiver, nothing special, but he's not going to do anything in terms of cutting strongly into Addison's thing. And I agree completely. And they're just going to throw like crazy. And yeah, I like him a significant amount better than the other three. But I do want to talk about Zay Flowers because I mentioned him. I believe I took him pretty early in our rookie draft. Mm-hmm. And I think I probably would prefer him the second most out because Rashad Bateman has been MIA, injured for most of his career. And I've said it, the first podcast we ever did was talking about OBJ. And I said there, I am absolutely not a believer. Just in his age, it's been years since he's been such a strong producer. I mean, he'll be solid. He'll command work. But I think Zay Flowers has a reasonable path to being the number one wide receiver, not the number one target. That will always be Mark Andrews. But I think he has a pretty reasonable avenue to be the number one wide receiver in that offense. And like you said, all reports out of camp have been overwhelmingly positive about him. And again, he's a guy that's going in the middle rounds of the draft. He's someone that's not going to be in your starting lineup. And so I definitely prefer him to guys like JSN and Quentin Johnston who are going to have a harder time finding playing time. Though I would, if I had to rank them, I'd go Addison, Flowers, Johnston, JSN in terms of this year.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where. Okay, so Fantasy Pros has those rookies ranked, I mean, obviously fairly close to each other. They've got Jordan Addison, wide receiver 38, JSN, wide receiver 40, Quentin Johnston, wide receiver 44, and then Zay Flowers, wide receiver 47. So Flowers is right now the cheapest of those receivers. There may come a situation where, based on the round, you probably just have to pick one because you may only get a chance to draft one of these rookie receivers. We know rookie receivers are historically productive at some point. It takes them a few weeks sometimes to get into the role that they're going to get, but the rookie receivers historically have been good sources for flex points. And I think Addison is maybe the safest bet for that after a couple weeks, and then probably Zay Flowers right behind him. I think JSN could easily prove us all wrong because I think he is the best receiver in this class, and he just has a tougher projectable role because we know Tyler Lockett exists, but Tyler Lockett quite frankly, needs to fuck off eventually. And maybe this year's the year, but we will see which one of these guys ends up being most productive. Addison, I think, the safest bet, though, and we are on the same page.
Absolutely.
There. And then final question from Big Ben's 22 on YouTube. I feel like this is not talked about enough. What defense do you think is going to be a good pick? So we'll start this by saying, and I think we mentioned it last week, that defenses are year over year the least projectable thing in fantasy. Like if you are trying to just draft whatever defense had the most points in fantasy last year, you're probably going to have a bad time. Defenses are not something generally that you can just set and forget in your lineup. I mean, one may come along every couple of years. I remember the Patriots defense a couple years ago was just generating an absurd amount of turnovers, and they were a great play for like 2 months straight. But it is generally not a position that you can just leave in your lineup and not worry about it. You have to play the matchups with defenses, and I've put together a few here.
This is good. I forget who put it in the comments, but somebody earlier in the stream asked when we're taking defenses. So whoever that was, you're going to get some insight here. Where was it? I don't know, but keep going.
Yeah, when we're taking defenses, I mean, typically I'll consider taking one around round like 13, I would say, because we're in a 12-teamer, and honestly, the position players have just dried up so much that I want to get that positional advantage at that point, so I'll start thinking about it.
Getting a defense there who has a good schedule weeks 1 through 3 maybe, or even week 1, they're more likely to help you get a win than some running back or wide receiver you take there. So I'm not afraid to go defense a little bit before round, like 13, 14 at the earliest, I'd say.
Yeah, if you believe in them, they're worth it. I mean, look, it's going to happen probably. Let me see, what does ESPN have the defenses ranked as? Do they have, I'm curious where they have like the Niners and the Eagles in terms of an overall. DST, okay, so Niners DST 1, Bills 2, Steelers 3. I'm surprised the Eagles are so low, even though I know they had some turnover. But anyway, I categorized the defenses, 8 of them, into these categories, and these are the 8 defenses that I would really be considering drafting. I mean, I guess I'll dig deeper if I end up taking one later than everyone else, but I don't usually do that. So here are some defenses that are good, in my opinion, specifically for the first 2 weeks, and really only those first 2 weeks. So the Atlanta Falcons, who added a bunch of good pieces on defense. Week 1, they're at home versus the Panthers, so you've got rookie Bryce Young. And then week 2, they're at home again versus the Packers and Jordan Love. So you've got a defense with an infusion of talent against 2 quarterbacks who are entirely unproven in the NFL. Week 3, they go at the Lions. You're probably not going to feel good about starting them then. And then week 4, they're at home versus the Jags. So yeah, you can cut bait on this defense after the first 2 weeks, but first 2 weeks, decent enough streamer.
If they get you 8 or so points, that could be the difference. That could be the difference.
Exactly. A lot of people are going to be sitting there with defenses that go for 2 or 3 points. Or I know our league actually, Pat, is less harsh on defenses as far as the negative points that they can provide you.
We don't have yards. We don't have yardage penalties.
So we can go negative, but it's only if that defense gets like 50 points hung on them. So
you got to get clocked for something like that to happen.
Yeah. So look, having a good defense definitely helps even more in other leagues where you get penalized more if you go negative.
Yeah. In another one you got here listed, like I said, I did a dynasty startup. I was the last guy to pick a defense, and I took Washington's defense.
Yes.
Strictly because they're playing the Cardinals week 1. Obviously, they're at Denver week 2, at Buffalo week 3, at Philly week 4. So you are definitely parting ways with them after week 2.
Sure?
But even if the Broncos aren't a great play, like that could, when you're that late in a draft, if you're the last guy to take a defense, you're going based on the week 1 matchup. So if they can help you win that week 1 against Arizona, do it. And that was my thing only, was that, hey, like, who's got the best matchup? It was Washington. They were like the 8th best ranked on Sleeper at that time, but I still took them.
Yeah, and again, this category of defenses, I have 3 of them in here. They are defenses that are specifically good for the first 2 weeks, and then you're cutting bait. So, yeah, you're not holding on to Washington when they go at Buffalo and at Philadelphia week 3 and 4. But week 1 and 2...
No, roll them out.
Week 1, they're a great play, and week 2, they might be a decent play. The other last team I have here is the Denver Broncos. Week 1, they are at home versus the Las Vegas Raiders and Jimmy G. Week 2, they are at home versus the Commanders. So that matchup, obviously, we talked about. But, yeah, 2 very doable matchups there for a defense that, again, Pat, was really good last year. People forget because of how dysfunctional the offense was. But this defense was damn good last year. And then week 3, they play at Miami. Miami, so you're not going to start him then. Nope. Week 4, though, they play at Chicago. You could consider holding on to them for that game if you want, but again, I'm just saying the defenses that you are comfortable for week 2, and then you can probably cut them and feel good about it.
Yeah.
This next category is defenses that are good for 2 out of the first 3 weeks, so you'll have to either sit them or drop them for their week 2 matchup, but weeks 1 and 3, it's pretty nice. Baltimore, week 1, they are at home versus the Texans. Obviously great. Week 2, they're at the Bengals. No. And then week 3, they're at home versus the Indianapolis Colts.
Yes.
So, look, Texans, Colts at home, 2 incredibly ideal matchups. I will probably eat the week of them playing the Bengals and keep the Ravens on my bench.
I'll be honest. I think the Colts might end up being like, I saw someone say like they're just going to chase who's playing the Cardinals. I think it might be the Colts.
Oh, I could see that for sure.
Just because of how volatile Anthony Richardson's going to be. Like they may have some weeks where they score, are lucky to score a touchdown and he's throwing picks.
And here's the thing, though. Anthony Richardson can perform well fantasy-wise, too, while the defense puts up points.
Absolutely.
Like, both things can happen.
Absolutely. So I would say that if I had to guess right now, like at the end of the year, the 32nd ranked will be the Colts. Like you're going to want to chase the Colts. Texans are another good one too, though. So that Baltimore, that's nice. And again, at the beginning of the year, your bench is a revolving door. You can afford to carry a defense, especially at the beginning of the year, without bye weeks and injuries and things. Well, hopefully not injuries. Knock on wood. Bye weeks and injuries out of the way. You can certainly afford to hold on to one for a week.
Sure. And then you've got the Jacksonville Jaguars here who, again, week 1 at the Colts, so targeting the Colts again. Week 2 at home versus the Chiefs, so you're probably sitting them down for that one. But week 3, they're at home versus the Texans, and then you could even stretch this to week 4 with the Jags if you want, at home versus the Falcons. So
and that should be a solid defense, too.
Right, so mostly bad quarterbacks here outside of the matchup with the Chiefs and Mahomes, but 3 of those first 4 weeks, you're feeling pretty good about the Jags defense. And then this last category is the defenses that are good for a while. So there's 2 defenses here that I think are pretty elite on paper, or at least very good. And then one that's not necessarily, but the schedule is just absurd. So you've got the Eagles to start out. Week 1, they're at New England. Week 2 versus Minnesota. Week 3 at Tampa Bay. Week 4 versus Washington. So look, I don't want to be a biased Patriots fan here, but I think the Patriots with a revamped offense, and then you look at a team like the Vikings, those aren't like lick your lips, like completely excited for those matchups, but they're good enough matchups for a good defense that you feel decent about it. And then you got the Bucks with either Baker or Trask week 3, and then you've got the Commanders with unproven Sam Howell week 4. So
and the thing is, there are going to be some weeks where you don't have a great matchup. You're basically kind of say like, who is the best matchup this week? So like you said, like the Patriots and maybe even the Bucks, they're not going to be like slam dunks, but they may be your best option on a given week.
You're not facing an elite offense is the key here. Like even the Vikings, like look, Justin Jefferson's going to put up absurd numbers. How is the rest of that offense going to be points-wise? They may not be that good this year. So I think that's an interesting defense to target, obviously the Eagles. Then you've got the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, duh. Week 1, they're at the Steelers and Kenny Pickett. Week 2, they're at the Rams. I mean, the Rams are maybe the biggest question mark in terms of a team this year. They could just be absolutely dreadful, or they could be, prolific on offense and terrible on defense. I don't know. But still, it's not a matchup you're afraid of if you're rostering the Niners defense. Week 3, they are at home versus the Giants and Daniel Jones. And then week 4, they've got the Cardinals. So again, no offenses that you are terrified of. And with the Niners defense, you need a pretty good excuse not to start them. And none of those teams are good excuses not to start them.
Exactly.
So you can start them for 4 weeks. And then the final one here, Pat, is the New Orleans Saints. So they are not, on the same tier as these 2 teams defensively with the talent on their roster. But schedule-wise, Pat, stop me when I reach an offense that scares you. Here's how the Saints open the season. At home versus the Titans. At the Panthers. At the Packers. At home versus the Bucks. At the Patriots. At the Texans, and then at home versus the Jags. That's where we finally reach something that frightens you.
The only one that even made me kind of raise my eyebrows a little bit is Green Bay, but still, like, we don't know. Jordan Love could be completely awful. So
and here's the best part, Pat. You want me to keep going beyond the Jags?
Oh God,
You've got at the Colts versus the Bears, at the Vikings, at the Falcons versus Detroit. I mean, I probably wouldn't feel great against Detroit, but again, it's not the worst. Versus Carolina, versus the Giants, versus the Rams, at the Bucks, versus the Falcons. Like,
What was it?
There's
Minnesota,
like 3
Detroit,
matchups.
and Jacksonville are the only ones where I'm clearly saying no. Like, no, I will not start.
Minnesota, Detroit, and Jacksonville, and even like Minnesota and Detroit are going to be pretty decent offenses. But like, if I'm really down bad, if the Saints defense is truly healthy, I guess at least maybe for the home matchup against the Detroit, look, it's not going to be the worst possible start.
That's true. Detroit was awful on the road last year.
Yeah, so I'm just saying for a defense, like, look, the Saints defense, the main concern with them is that they're old. They're one of the older defenses in the league, multiple 30-plus year old guys.
By the way, shout out Cameron Jordan getting an extension. Like, he's got to be one of the more, like, I was looking at his stats, like, that man is a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Like, what he's done for his like, he's got to be one of the most, like, underrated great players of the last decade plus. So, good for it. Good for him. Good for him.
Yeah, I would agree. And Cameron Jordan, kind of spearheading that defense that I think, Pat, this is going to be one of the defenses that is just going to be very, I guess, maybe sneaky for fantasy. Like, you are just going to be able to comfortably start them kind of often unless they prove that they are just really burnable and their age is showing, whatever. But they have the best set of matchups for a fantasy defense that you could really hope for over the course of an entire season. But at the very least, the first 4 weeks, I mean, Tennessee, Carolina, Green Bay, Tampa, unproven quarterbacks all the way down. And then you get to the Patriots, again, you could justify starting them against Mac Jones, and then the Texans, and then before you finally get to Trevor a month and a half into the season. So Saints are maybe one of my favorite defenses to target in fantasy. Maybe not one that is super high on everybody's draft boards or rankings. I think ESPN actually has them as the number 6 defense, but certainly a more favorable schedule than most of the defenses ahead of them. So that's our thought on defense. I usually have to do that sort of digging eventually anyway.
Yeah, so might as well do it. Might as well help you guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Big Ben's 22, for making me do it probably 3 weeks early. Defensive scheduling is usually like the last thing I look at, so I could just figure out who the fuck I want in round 13. But hey, I did it now, so thank you for helping me get my shit together. But that's going to do it for the show today. We don't have viewer questions to close it out because basically the whole show is viewer questions. So guys, please keep sending us those viewer questions. Again, for those of you watching on YouTube, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever. Just search Off the Bench with Benchwarmer Brand. You will find us. I've done a little bit of a colorful rebrand. There's a little more light blue. You should be able to find us pretty easily. And if you are on YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you guys for hanging with us.
Thank you guys so much.
The subscriber total is rising, and I'm going to make Pat famous whether it kills me or not. So
when we kind of jumped off the wagon by ourselves, but this has been, we didn't know it was going to happen, but this has been great. You guys have been great. And those of you guys, a lot of the same people here every week on these streams. So we appreciate you guys a lot.
Yes, and this is a big thing too, is I want to push the live and the consistent aspect of this show. Every Tuesday we will be live with you guys, so come football season, we will be able to commiserate on whatever happened over that weekend. We'll have the full picture fantasy-wise after Monday Night Football, and we will talk with you guys every Tuesday, typically 6 Eastern time, 3 Pacific, I guess. Today was a one-off, but thank you guys for hanging with us no matter what time we're on, and we hope to see you guys going forward. So, Pat, anything else for today?
Nope. That's it. Go Fancy Bagels. The reason we're early today because we're playing in our softball championship. We're going back to back. I'm not going to play, but I'm going to do a hell of a book, and we're going to bring it home. So,
Pat's the sexiest cheerleader you could ever ask for.
All
right, guys. We'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye-bye.